The airplane hummed softly as passengers settled into their seats. Window shades were pulled up. Conversations filled the cabin with a gentle murmur, and the smell of coffee and faint perfume mingled in the recycled air. In seat 12F, a woman adjusted her carry-on bag and glanced out the window. She was quiet, calm, and seemed to fit perfectly into the sea of travelers around her. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other passenger, just a woman trying to make her way from one city to another. Her eyes, however, carried a certain stillness, a sense of awareness that suggested she was used to paying attention to everything around her. She settled in, making sure her tray table was secure and her seatbelt clicked snugly. Around her, children squirmed, couples whispered, and some passengers already drifted off to sleep. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, smiling and assisting where needed, unaware that one of their passengers carried a story far larger than her seat number suggested. She smiled politely when one flight attendant paused to ask if she needed anything, and then returned to her seat, closing her eyes briefly as the engines roared to life. As the plane taxied toward the runway, she thought quietly about the day ahead. Even though she had traveled often, each flight still carried its own small anxiety. Not fear exactly, but a restless awareness that always came before the liftoff. She noticed the way the plane tilted slightly as it turned, how the sunlight glinted off the fuselage, and how the cabin's hum became a steady vibration beneath her fingertips. She always observed, always calculated. Her life had taught her to notice the smallest details. Most people around her were absorbed in magazines, phones, or idle conversations, unaware of the world's minute signals. She, however, never stopped noticing. The seat beside her remained empty for a while, and she took the opportunity to stretch quietly. She pulled her laptop from the bag and glanced at a few emails, her fingers moving almost automatically across the keyboard. She wasn't working on anything ordinary, and yet it was disguised in the simplest form: charts, schedules, and reports. The kind of paperwork anyone might expect from a busy professional. To someone watching, she was just another business traveler, quietly preparing for the day ahead. Outside, the runway stretched long and straight, with planes taxiing like ants along the tarmac. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and even, announcing the expected takeoff time and weather conditions. She listened politely, her attention flicking between the tray in front of her, her notebook, and the faint shimmer of the sun hitting the clouds beyond the window. She always noticed the weather, the conditions, the smallest variations. Those details mattered more than anyone around her could imagine. As the plane lined up and the engines roared to life, she tightened her seatbelt slightly and allowed herself a small breath. Flying had never been something she took lightly. Though she had traveled countless times, she approached each takeoff with a mixture of calm preparation and instinctive vigilance. This wasn't anxiety. It was awareness. It was being present in every single moment. Her eyes scanned the cabin discreetly, observing passengers' postures, the way people interacted with the crew, even the small expressions of impatience or excitement. She noticed it all, yet she remained invisible, like a shadow in plain sight. The plane lifted off the ground smoothly, ascending into the blue sky, leaving the bustling airport behind. The hum of the engines deepened and the cabin lights dimmed slightly to allow passengers a chance to relax. Around her, people began to adjust, flipping open laptops, opening books, or leaning back with closed eyes. Some chatted quietly, others whispered to their neighbors. She, however, remained still, her mind quietly working through routines and calculations that no one could see. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, but beneath that calm surface, a mind trained to notice, assess, and respond was always active. She thought about the unusual irony of her position. Here she was, sitting among ordinary passengers, seemingly ordinary herself, while a world that she had been a part of often operated with precision, intensity, and sometimes life-or-death consequences. She had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. People often assumed what they saw on the surface was all there was. No one would guess the layers beneath, the experiences, the discipline, the countless hours of training, or the quiet moments of doubt she had overcome. Today she could remain just a passenger in seat 12F, unnoticed and unremarkable, yet she carried the weight of expertise few could imagine. Flight attendants continued their rounds, offering drinks and snacks. She politely declined water and soda, preferring to simply observe. Her gaze drifted occasionally to the people around her, A father reading to his small daughter. A group of colleagues sharing a laugh. A young woman nervously fidgeting with her headphones. Each person had their story, their background, their struggles and joys. She had long ago learned to watch, to understand, and to remain quietly empathetic without revealing herself. It was not a conscious choice of superiority. It was a habit formed through years of seeing life's complexity unfold in ways most people never noticed. Midway through the flight, she pulled out a small notebook. Unlike the laptop or reports, this notebook contained personal reflections, sketches of ideas, and sometimes strategic notes she could not discuss openly. Her handwriting was neat, precise yet flowing with a personal touch. For a moment, the world outside the airplane faded. She wrote quietly, the tip of the pen moving in rhythm with the plane's gentle hum. Passengers around her remained oblivious. To them, she was simply jotting notes, perhaps planning her day, composing a to-do list. To her, every word, every line carried purpose, discipline, and intention. An hour into the flight, turbulence caused a brief shudder. Passengers murmured in discomfort, but she remained composed. She adjusted slightly, following the movement of the plane instinctively. Her body attuned to the mechanics of flight in a way few could understand. It was second nature to her, a combination of training and instinct. Even the smallest gust of air, the subtle shift of the plane's trajectory, was noticed, processed, and catalogued. Her mind never rested, even while appearing to rest. The flight attendants returned, checking on passengers and offering assistance where needed. She gave a small smile to a young crew member, who looked momentarily curious but quickly moved on. There was something about her that drew subtle attention, though few could define it. It was not the way she looked or what she carried. It was the quiet confidence, the awareness that lingered in her eyes and posture. She was present without drawing attention, powerful without demonstration, and completely ordinary in the world's eyes. She glanced out the window again, seeing the clouds stretch like vast oceans beneath her. They were beautiful and endless, but to her, they were also part of the familiar environment she had navigated countless times. She thought briefly about the destinations she had flown to, the people she had met, the challenges she had faced, and the quiet victories that went unnoticed. Sitting here in 12F, she could almost smile at the irony. Life often required moments of invisibility to carry out its greatest tasks. Today was just another flight, another day in a world that would never fully comprehend the experiences she carried quietly beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed lightly in her bag. She ignored it, knowing the message could wait. Distractions were unnecessary when attention was more valuable than anything else. She adjusted her posture, leaned back slightly, and let the rhythm of the flight settle around her. The ordinary noise, the chatter, the shifting bodies around her, all of it was background, a stage set for a life she had learned to navigate in silence. No one noticed. No one needed to. As the plane climbed higher, breaking through layers of cloud and into clear blue, a sense of calm enveloped her. The ordinary flight, the seemingly mundane travel, was just a small piece of a larger existence she inhabited. To the passengers around her, she was invisible, a quiet figure in seat 12F. But beneath that invisibility, a life of discipline, courage, and quiet mastery pulsed steadily. Today, as on many days, she would be just a passenger. But life had a way of recognizing the extraordinary, often when least expected. And so she sat, observing, reflecting, and preparing quietly. The hum of the engines, the distant chatter, the faint smell of coffee, all of it blended into the rhythm of her awareness. She was ordinary to the world, yet extraordinary in ways no one could guess. The flight continued smoothly, each mile bringing her closer to a destination unknown to those around her. Seat 12F remained her stage of anonymity, a place where the world could see one thing, while the truth of her life remained just beyond their understanding. She did not know what lay ahead that day, but she knew that moments of recognition often came when least expected, and as the plane sailed through the sky, she allowed herself a quiet thought. Sometimes, even in the most ordinary places, the extraordinary quietly waited. She closed her notebook and leaned back slightly, letting her thoughts drift to memories that were both distant and vivid. Even though she appeared calm and collected to the world, her life had been anything but ordinary. Every choice she had made, every step she had taken had led her to this point. sitting quietly on a plane while carrying experiences most people could not imagine, from a U. There were moments of doubt, of course. Everyone has them, even those who seem invincible. She remembers the nights she would lie awake, wondering if she had what it took to continue. Injuries, setbacks, and failures came along the way, each testing her resolve. There were flights where she had to make split-second decisions, and each time, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Mistakes could be fatal. Success required perfection. And yet, she pushed forward, understanding that the life she had chosen demanded resilience above all else. Her training eventually led her to operate some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. The experience was intoxicating, not because of thrill-seeking, but because of mastery. She learned to trust her instincts, her training, and the aircraft itself. Every maneuver was calculated, every adjustment precise. She developed a reputation among her peers not only for technical skill, but for calm leadership in situations where others might panic. She had an innate ability to read circumstances, anticipate risks, and act decisively. It was the kind of presence that inspired confidence in those around her, though she rarely drew attention to herself. Despite the rigor of her professional life, she also had a personal side that few ever saw. Moments of solitude were treasured. Watching a sunset, reading a book, listening to music, or walking through quiet streets where no one recognized her. She valued these times not as escapes but as reminders of her humanity. Her achievements were extraordinary, but she remained deeply grounded in reality, understanding that even the most exceptional people need ordinary moments to stay connected to the world. There were friendships formed along the way, bonds created in shared experiences of pressure, endurance, and mutual respect. She trusted few people completely, but those she did became her closest allies. They had witnessed her struggle and her triumphs, her moments of vulnerability and her moments of brilliance. These relationships were a cornerstone of her life, providing balance to the intensity of her career. She had learned early on that trust, loyalty, and camaraderie were as important as skill and knowledge in the sky. Her career was not without sacrifice. Family, relationships, and personal time were often secondary to duty. She accepted this as part of the path she had chosen, but the choices were never easy. There were occasions when she longed for simplicity, for a life free from schedules, missions, and responsibilities that carried weight far beyond her own life. Yet she never wavered. The sense of purpose she felt of contributing to something larger than herself was a guiding force she could not ignore. One of the most defining aspects of her life was the call sign she had earned over the years. It was more than a name. It was a symbol of her skill, her leadership, and the respect she had cultivated among the pilots and personnel she worked with. A call sign was a mark of distinction in a world where recognition came quietly, often only in the form of subtle acknowledgement from those who understood the craft. Her call sign represented years of dedication, countless missions, and the respect of some of the most skilled pilots in the Air Force. Her presence in that quiet seat on the plane belied the impact of her life's work. If anyone aboard knew her call sign, it would have elicited astonishment, perhaps even respect. But she did not need acknowledgement from strangers. She had learned that true accomplishment was not about recognition. It was about doing the work, mastering the craft, and living with integrity. The world could see her as ordinary, and that was perfectly fine. She had become comfortable inhabiting the space between the extraordinary and the ordinary. She reflected on one particular memory from a past mission, a moment that encapsulated both the danger and the exhilaration of her work. The aircraft she piloted had encountered unexpected turbulence at high altitude. Instruments flickered, warning lights blinked, and the team on the ground was alerting her to potential complications. Every decision had to be precise. Hesitation could have been catastrophic. Yet she remained calm, relying on training and instinct. The maneuver she executed prevented disaster, but no one outside her immediate team ever knew of it. It was a quiet victory, one of many that defined her career. That experience taught her a fundamental truth about her life. Heroism often occurs in silence. Achievements, no matter how significant, were frequently invisible to the wider world, yet the impact remained real, tangible, and lasting. She carried that lesson with her into every flight, every mission, and every interaction. It shaped her understanding of value, recognition, and humility. Being extraordinary did not require an audience, only the commitment to excellence itself. As the plane continued its journey, She allowed herself a small smile at the thought of her current anonymity. Here she was, just another traveler in seat 12F, blending into the crowd, while her life had been defined by experiences that commanded attention and respect in worlds few would ever see. She understood the irony and the quiet satisfaction it brought. To the passengers around her, she was invisible. To those who knew her, she was remarkable. And both realities existed simultaneously, perfectly balanced. She thought about the future not in terms of ambition, but in terms of ongoing responsibility. Her work was never finished. There were always new challenges, new lessons, and new heights to master. Even now, as she traveled across the country, the skills, instincts, and awareness she had cultivated remained at the ready. She could step into the extraordinary at a moment's notice, even if the world around her remained blissfully unaware. Her reflection was interrupted by the soft voice of the flight attendant offering a beverage. She politely declined, giving a small nod of thanks. Even in this ordinary moment, she moved with purpose and quiet attention. Every gesture, every glance, every breath was measured, intentional. She had learned that life, even when it appeared ordinary, required mindfulness and presence. Each day, each interaction carried significance. She could not let distractions, fatigue, or assumptions cloud her awareness. Looking out the window, she watched the sun climb higher in the sky, scattering light across the clouds in golden rays. It was beautiful, almost magical, but it also reminded her of the vastness of the world, of the countless people, places, and possibilities that existed beyond the airplane's walls. She had seen much of it, yet each journey brought new perspectives. She thought about how her life intersected with others, often invisibly, influencing outcomes without acknowledgement. It was a responsibility she accepted willingly. As the flight continued, she allowed herself a moment to think about her personal motivations. She did not seek fame, accolades, or public recognition. What mattered most was the integrity of her work, the safety of those who relied on her, and the quiet pride that came from knowing she had prepared, performed, and persevered. She had cultivated a life of discipline, resilience, and excellence. And though the world outside the airplane remained unaware of her accomplishments, she carried them with confidence, humility, and satisfaction. Eventually, she put her notebook away and leaned back, letting her eyes close briefly. The hum of the engines, the soft murmurs of passengers, and the rhythmic sway of the plane created a meditative space. She reflected on the lessons she had learned, the people she had worked with, and the experiences that had shaped her. Every flight, every mission, every moment of challenge had contributed to the person she was now, calm, capable, and quietly extraordinary. Even in her current anonymity, she knew that her life had purpose. Being extraordinary did not require constant recognition. It required dedication, focus, and the willingness to step forward when the moment demanded it. And though no one on the plane could see the full scope of her life, she carried it all silently, with a quiet strength and a steadfast presence. The hours passed, the plane cruising steadily through the sky. She remained in seat 12F, outwardly ordinary, inwardly extraordinary. She thought about how life often balanced the visible and the invisible, the mundane and the remarkable. Her story, like so many others, was not one of spectacle or fame. It was one of quiet mastery, resilience, and integrity. And though she appeared simply as a passenger, she was always ready, always vigilant, and always prepared for the moments that mattered most. The airplane hummed steadily, cruising above clouds that looked like mountains of cotton. Passengers had begun to settle in for the long flight, some dozing quietly, others scrolling through their phones or talking softly to neighbors. She sat in seat 12F, outwardly calm, but her mind was quietly alert, taking in everything around her. Every detail mattered. The small gestures of passengers, the inflection in voices, even the subtle movements of the flight attendants. To anyone watching, she was ordinary. But she had learned over time that ordinary appearances often hid extraordinary realities. A young mother a few rows ahead struggled to calm a crying baby. She watched for a moment, her expression gentle but attentive, noticing the mother's exhaustion and frustration. She considered offering help, but she also recognized that some situations were personal and delicate. So she simply observed, her empathy quiet but present, a reflection of her understanding of human behavior. In her life, awareness had always been a tool, not a burden. Every environment, every moment required attention but not interference. She had learned when to act and when to remain. The flight continued smoothly, but she sensed a subtle change in the atmosphere. It was not obvious, not in the way a sudden announcement or a loud noise might be. It was quieter, a ripple of awareness she could feel rather than see. Somewhere, far above the ordinary hum of the aircraft, her call sign had been mentioned in a communication channel she could not hear. The ripple passed through the air in subtle ways. The posture of a crew member, a shift in attention from nearby passengers who were not even aware of why they were noticing. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that would quietly turn her ordinary seat into a focal point. She sipped water from the small cup provided, her movements deliberate and composed. The faint clink of plastic against metal seemed louder in her mind than it likely did to anyone else. She did not react outwardly to the ripple she sensed. There was no need. Awareness was enough. She had long learned that reaction often revealed more than silence. In the military and aviation and high-stakes environments, she had learned the value of watching, calculating, and understanding before acting. Somewhere miles away, F-22 pilots received a communication that immediately caught their attention. Her call sign had appeared on a secure channel, a symbol of experience, expertise, and respect. Instinctively, they adjusted their posture, straightened in their seats, and communicated silently with each other. They understood what it meant without words. To them, she was not just a name. She was a presence, a standard of excellence that demanded acknowledgement. It was a rare and quiet tribute, one that reflected discipline, respect, and recognition in a way few civilians could understand. Back in the airplane, the ripple of awareness manifested in subtle ways. A flight attendant paused slightly longer near her seat, as if registering something intangible. A passenger, a row back, straightened unconsciously, sensing the quiet authority in her demeanor. No one spoke aloud about it, and there was no overt acknowledgement, but the energy shifted. Ordinary environments sometimes bend around extraordinary people, even when the reason is invisible to most. She was used to it. She had been aware of such shifts countless times throughout her career, though they were almost always unnoticed by the world at large. She reached for her notebook, flipping to a blank page and writing lightly, carefully, as if the pen itself captured not only her thoughts but a small part of the quiet energy around her. She did not write about her accomplishments, nor about her recognition. She wrote about preparation, focus, and the importance of remaining calm. Even here, high above the clouds, she treated the environment with the same discipline she had applied to every cockpit, every mission, and every training exercise she had ever experienced. A slight turbulence caused a ripple through the cabin. Passengers adjusted nervously, some gripping armrests, some glancing to neighbors for reassurance. She did not flinch. Her body moved with the plane's subtle shifts instinctively, her senses attuned to motion and pressure in a way that made her seem unshakable. It was not bravado, it was trained precision. Years of piloting, years of operating in high-pressure environments, had taught her to remain centered even when the world around her wavered. A voice over the intercom brought the captain's calm reassurance, and she noted it with polite attention. Everyone around her listened casually, some more closely than others. She, however, absorbed more than the words themselves. She noted the cadence, the tone, the minor fluctuations in pitch that suggested confidence, caution, or awareness. To an ordinary passenger, these details were trivial. To her, they were information, subtle indicators of the environment's condition, of human behavior under routine stress. Then it happened. A flight attendant, trained to observe and assist, looked toward her with something between curiosity and quiet recognition. Not overt recognition, not a comment that would disturb the calm of the cabin, but an awareness that something about this passenger was unusual. Perhaps it was her posture, the subtle way she carried herself, or the sense of presence that emanated quietly from her seat. It was enough to create a moment of pause, a fraction of a second where the ordinary reality of the cabin seemed to shift imperceptibly. Somewhere miles away, the F-22 pilots were moving with precision. They had received the secure acknowledgement of her presence, a protocol that commanded attention. Within their formation, they straightened, helmets shifting slightly, hands adjusting controls with deliberate care. No one on the plane would see this, but the tribute was underway. To them, she was not a passenger. She was a figure of respect, someone whose skill and discipline they understood intimately. It was a rare and silent honor, an acknowledgement of years of mastery that few outside their world could appreciate. Back in her seat, she felt a subtle shift in the cabin's energy, though she could not see its source. It was not dramatic, not noticeable in the way a loud event would be, but she sensed it nonetheless. Her mind catalogued it, storing the information with the same methodical precision she used for every other observation. She did not react overtly because there was no need. She understood that recognition, even when invisible to most, could manifest in quiet ways, through subtle shifts in awareness and attention. Passengers continued their routines, unaware that the ordinary flight had quietly intersected with something extraordinary. A man reading a magazine turned a page, oblivious to the ripple of awareness around him. A child played quietly with a toy, focused entirely on immediate amusement. Life continued ordinary and unremarkable, even as an invisible tribute unfolded. She observed all of it with calm detachment, her mind registering patterns, behaviors, and nuances that most people would overlook. The F-22 pilots adjusted in formation, a silent display of discipline and respect. Their movements were precise, calculated, and deliberate. They communicated without words, a silent protocol that conveyed acknowledgement of her presence and her significance. It was a reminder of the world she had navigated for years, a world where skill, discipline, and awareness were recognized and honored, often without fanfare. The tribute was quiet, professional, and absolute. Back on the plane, the flight attendant returned briefly to her area, checking passengers but also scanning subtly. She caught the woman in seat 12F glancing briefly out the window, serene and composed, unaware that her presence had already initiated acknowledgement far beyond the cabin walls. The ordinary observer would see only a passenger, perhaps a woman lost in thought or focused on a notebook. The extraordinary observer, however, would recognize the ripple she caused, a subtle, quiet power that manifested without words or action. She returned her attention to the clouds outside, watching them stretch endlessly, illuminated by sunlight that glimmered like gold. Even as the tribute unfolded silently far away, she remained focused, calm, and present. Her life had taught her that moments of recognition, no matter how subtle or invisible to most, were part of a continuum of responsibility, mastery, and awareness. She understood that her work, her presence, and her discipline were visible in ways that few could measure, yet they existed undeniably. Her fingers traced lines in the notebook again, but not about the tribute, not about the pilots, not about the acknowledgement that had quietly begun. She wrote about focus, attention, and presence. She wrote about being ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in preparation, a duality she had embraced throughout her life. To anyone observing, she was a passenger. To those who knew her, she was a figure of skill, respect, and influence. Both realities coexisted, and both were equally true. As the flight continued, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. It was rare that she had time to consider the impact of her presence beyond immediate responsibilities. Most of her life had been dedicated to action, preparation, and awareness rather than reflection. Yet now, in seat 12F, high above the clouds, she could contemplate the delicate intersection between ordinary life and the recognition of expertise. She could feel it quietly, invisibly, in a way that reinforced the balance she had learned to maintain throughout her life. The hours passed with a rhythm that was both familiar and comforting. Passengers dozed, read, ate, or watched screens, completely unaware of the extraordinary chain of acknowledgement unfolding quietly in the world beyond their perception. She remained in her seat, observing, reflecting, and absorbing the subtle currents of energy around her. Life often worked in invisible ways, she thought, and recognition did not always need an audience. Some tributes were meant to exist quietly, seen only by those who understood, and in that quiet awareness she allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. She was ordinary in the eyes of the world, yet the invisible acknowledgement from those who truly understood her skill, her discipline, and her dedication had already begun. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it was profound. It was a reminder of the quiet power of mastery, presence, and unwavering dedication. High above the clouds, the airplane continued its steady course. Passengers were settling into their routines, unaware that something extraordinary was quietly unfolding in the world beyond the cabin. She sat in seat 12F, outwardly calm, her eyes occasionally flicking to the window, watching the soft waves of clouds roll beneath the plane. She adjusted her seat slightly, the tray in front of her firmly in place, and took a deep, steadying breath. Back on the commercial flight, she remained unaware of the exact details, yet her senses registered the subtle shift. She felt a change in the rhythm of the day, something imperceptible to the ordinary traveler. It was not loud or obvious, but those trained to observe could feel it, the energy of recognition, respect, and quiet acknowledgement. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, letting her awareness stretch outward, though she did not yet know what was happening. This was a world she had navigated many times, the ordinary and the extraordinary overlapping, often unseen, yet profoundly real. The formation of F-22 jets moved into position with fluid precision. The lead pilot made a slight adjustment, wings aligned, engines humming in perfect synchronization. Each pilot understood the unspoken rules of the moment. They had trained for countless scenarios, yet this one was unique, recognizing someone whose achievements had quietly shaped the very standards they followed. They did not need to speak aloud. The act itself carried meaning. It was discipline, respect, and honor, all expressed silently through movement, position, and focus. The sky around them was vast and clear, the sunlight reflecting off the metal bodies of the jets like polished silver. The formation split briefly, creating a precise gap that framed the significance of the moment. Each pilot maintained perfect control, wings parallel, engines at exact speeds. In that fleeting sequence, they were not performing for anyone on the ground, nor were they showing off skill. This was a salute, a recognition, a tribute executed with meticulous care. It was silent yet powerful, a visual language that spoke volumes to those who understood its meaning. On the commercial plane, she glanced out the window without knowing what she might see. Clouds stretched endlessly below, soft and white, and the sun glimmered against them like liquid gold. She thought briefly about her own journey, the countless hours of training, preparation, and moments of quiet decision-making that had defined her career. She reflected on the path that had brought her here, blending seamlessly into the ordinary world while carrying an extraordinary life quietly beneath the surface. She had been taught to expect acknowledgement rarely and to receive it humbly, and even now she did not seek it. The jets moved in unison, a choreography of precision, signaling acknowledgement across the sky. The lead pilot adjusted slightly, wings perfectly aligned, engines synchronized to maintain absolute formation. It was a message, conveyed without words, that resonated deeply with those trained to understand it. The formation itself was a tribute. Every line, every motion, every adjustment had been designed to honor someone who had earned respect through years of quiet mastery and skill. Even though she could not see them, a part of her felt the energy. Those moments carried weight, intangible yet undeniable. She had experienced many situations where acknowledgement existed beyond visibility, silent respect, recognition without ceremony, gestures understood only by those in the know. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the sky above, imagining a pattern forming, precise and deliberate. Something inside her recognized the moment, even before it fully arrived. The pilots executed a synchronized turn, a move that was both technical and symbolic. Their jets created a sweeping arc, engines roaring gently but with authority, wings cutting the sunlight at angles that reflected years of disciplined training. Each pilot maintained perfect spacing, understanding instinctively that this was more than a maneuver. It was a message. It was respect, admiration, and recognition distilled into action, a language without words that carried profound meaning. On the airplane, the flight attendants continued their routine, unaware of the extraordinary tribute above them. Passengers shifted in their seats, some looking out the window, some engrossed in books or screens. She observed the small movements around her, noting the normal patterns of life, the little gestures of human behavior that always fascinated her. And yet, amidst the ordinary, she felt the quiet presence of something larger, a force of recognition, invisible yet palpable, affirming the years of work, the discipline, and the integrity she had carried silently. The formation completed its arc, and the lead pilot tilted the plane slightly, signaling the peak of the tribute. The other jets followed in flawless alignment, engines humming in harmony, wings tracing perfect lines across the open sky. It was a silent salute, precise and dignified, conveying everything that words could not. It was meant for her alone, a recognition of skill, courage, and quiet leadership. In that moment, the sky itself seemed to bend around the significance of her life, invisible to most, yet monumental in meaning. She felt an unfamiliar flutter, a mix of surprise, humility, and quiet pride. Her awareness, honed over years of observing and interpreting, sensed the acknowledgement even before any words reached her. She did not move, did not react outwardly. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, but inside, a surge of emotion passed through her. A deep understanding that her contributions, her discipline, and her dedication had been recognized in a way that mattered profoundly. Even in her calm, she could not suppress a small, almost imperceptible smile. Recognition had arrived silently, without ceremony, without noise, yet it carried more weight than any public acknowledgement could. She had been trained to act, to lead, to serve, and rarely to receive. And yet in this invisible moment she allowed herself a quiet, private acknowledgement of the honor she had been shown. It was fleeting, intimate, and entirely appropriate to the life she had led. The pilots continued their formation, wings aligned, engines humming softly but with power. They maintained perfect spacing, communicating through subtle signals, executing every movement with precision. There was no rush, no drama, no showiness, only the quiet, disciplined expression of respect. To anyone untrained, it would have appeared as ordinary formation flying. To those who understood, it was a tribute unparalleled in its significance. She returned her gaze to the window, absorbing the beauty of the clouds below, reflecting on the trajectory of her own life. The silent salute above was a reminder of the extraordinary balance she maintained. Ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in experience. She thought about the lessons that had brought her here, the patience, the discipline, the quiet leadership, and the ability to operate unseen when necessary. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a deep connection to a world that recognized mastery in subtle but powerful ways. The flight continued smoothly, the hum of the engine steady and calming. Passengers remained largely unaware of the moment that had unfolded above them. A father adjusted his child's seatbelt. A woman flipped a magazine page, and a few dozed quietly, oblivious to the extraordinary tribute that had passed overhead. Yet she knew. She had felt it, recognized it, and accepted it with quiet grace. It was a reminder that some honors do not require applause, and some recognition is meant to exist quietly, understood only by those trained to see its significance. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sense of the tribute wash over her. It was a mixture of pride, humility, and reflection, a reminder of the life she had built, the skills she had honed, and the respect she had quietly earned. She did not need to speak about it, nor did she need to announce it. The acknowledgement existed, real and profound. In a world where precision, discipline, and skill were understood deeply but often silently. The jets finally completed their final adjustment, a subtle nod to the full scope of the tribute. Engines softened, wings aligned to final positions, formation steady and precise. Somewhere below, she sat in her ordinary seat, completely composed yet fully aware that an extraordinary acknowledgement had occurred. It was invisible to the casual observer, but it was not invisible to her. That alone made it powerful, meaningful, and unforgettable. The sky above returned to its regular rhythm, vast and blue, sunlight reflecting off clouds that stretched endlessly. The F-22 pilots resumed routine, their silent tribute complete, yet its impact lingering in a way that would remain with her forever. On the plane, she opened her notebook again, pen moving quietly across the page, recording thoughts, reflections, and perhaps a hint of the profound emotion she could not fully articulate. Her life, extraordinary yet quietly lived, had been recognized in a manner perfectly suited to its nature, subtle, disciplined, and deeply significant. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement of what had just occurred. Her eyes flicked to the passengers around her, ordinary and unaware, and she felt no desire to change that. The world could continue as it always had, ignorant of the extraordinary life that had passed among them in seat 12F. And that was exactly as it should be. Recognition, she had learned, was most meaningful when it was earned, when it was given with respect, and when it existed quietly, without fanfare or spectacle. Their seats, fastened seatbelts, and prepared for landing. The hum of the engine softened and the cabin lights brightened slightly, signaling the end of the journey. She remained in seat 12F, outwardly calm, her notebook tucked neatly into her bag. Her mind, however, was alive with reflections on what had quietly unfolded in the sky above. It had been a moment of acknowledgement unlike any other, yet she carried it with a quiet, personal pride. as though it belonged to her alone. Landing procedures were routine, but she observed them with a trained eye. The pilot's adjustments were PI. She thought about how life often balanced extraordinary events with ordinary routines. The tribute above had been remarkable, yet she knew it would exist largely unnoticed by the public. That did not matter. The essence of such acknowledgement was in the understanding and the respect of those who truly knew her work. It was private, meaningful, and entirely in keeping with the life she had built. She had long understood that true accomplishment did not require applause. It required quiet mastery, consistency, and integrity. As she reached the baggage claim, she retrieved her suitcase and paused for a moment, allowing herself a brief reflection. The ordinary world moved around her. Passengers claimed luggage, airport staff assisted travelers, and announcements echoed softly across the terminal. Yet for her, the world had shifted subtly in a way that few could perceive.
She had been honored in the sky, and though the acknowledgement had been invisible to most,
it had strengthened her resolve, her pride, and her understanding of what it meant to lead a life of quiet excellence. Walking toward the exit, she allowed her mind to wander, reflecting on her journey. Each flight, each mission, each decision she had made had contributed to the person she was now. She had learned to value preparation over chance, discipline over convenience, and integrity over recognition. The tribute from the pilots was a reminder that these principles mattered, that those who understood their significance would respond in ways that transcended words and ceremonies. She paused briefly outside the terminal, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the gentle rush of wind against her skin. Ordinary life awaited her, conversations, errands, small interactions, but she felt a renewed sense of connection to her extraordinary path. She understood that her work, her discipline, and her dedication had created ripples that extended beyond immediate perception. Even when invisible, her actions carried weight, influence, and meaning. The invisible tribute had reminded her of the value of quiet mastery and the significance of respect earned through skill and integrity. Her thoughts drifted to those she had trained with and learned from. The F-22 pilots, her mentors and colleagues, had all shaped her understanding of discipline, precision, and quiet leadership. The acknowledgement above had been an extension of that shared respect, a culmination of years of mutual understanding and experience. She realized that her life had always been about more than personal achievement. It was about contributing to a network of expertise, trust, and dedication that spanned far beyond herself. As she stepped into the parking lot, the sounds of cars, engines, and footsteps filled the air. Ordinary life continued, indifferent to the extraordinary events that had occurred silently above. She welcomed it. Ordinary life provided balance, grounding, and perspective. It reminded her that while acknowledgement and recognition were meaningful, they were only one aspect of a life built on discipline, awareness, and quiet excellence. She moved with confidence, her presence calm and unassuming, yet entirely aware of the duality she carried. Ordinary to the world, extraordinary in her own reality. She paused to look up at the sky, the vast expanse stretching endlessly above. The sun had shifted slightly, casting long shadows across the cityscape. In that moment, she thought about how life often required balance between what was seen and unseen, what was acknowledged, and what remained private. The tribute in the sky had been fleeting, invisible to most, yet it had resonated deeply within her. It was a reminder that excellence, discipline, and mastery existed independently of public recognition, yet their impact could be profound. Walking toward her car, she reflected on the personal meaning of that acknowledgement. The moment had been quiet, disciplined, and entirely aligned with the principles that had guided her life: integrity, mastery, and humility. She understood that the significance of recognition was not in spectacle, but in understanding. Those who had acknowledged her presence did so with precision, respect, and awareness. It was a rare and meaningful honor, one that reinforced the values she had cultivated over decades of dedication. As she drove away from the airport, the city unfolding before her, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Life would continue, ordinary and routine for most, but she carried the invisible acknowledgement with her. It was not something she needed to share. It was part of her internal landscape, a confirmation of the life she had built, the skills she had honed, and the respect she had earned silently. Every decision, every action, every moment of focus had contributed to this outcome. It was both humbling and empowering. She thought about the future, about the journey still ahead, the responsibilities still waiting, and the challenges she would face. The tribute in the sky had reminded her that mastery and dedication were always recognized in ways that mattered most, even if invisible to the wider world. She resolved to continue living with the same focus, integrity, and quiet excellence that had defined her life thus far. Recognition, she knew, was meaningful only when it was earned and understood by those who truly knew its value. As the day unfolded, she moved through ordinary life with calm assurance. Every interaction, every decision, and every observation carried the subtle influence of the extraordinary life she had led. She smiled at small acts of kindness, appreciated moments of quiet reflection, and carried with her the silent pride of acknowledgement from those who understood her skill and dedication. The world around her remained ordinary, yet she navigated it with a presence shaped by experience, discipline, and quiet mastery. By evening, she returned home, a space of personal comfort and reflection. She unpacked, settled in, and allowed herself a few moments to fully absorb the day. The memory of the silent tribute lingered, not as a spectacle, but as a personal affirmation of everything she had built through years of focus, preparation, and dedication. She understood that extraordinary moments often occurred in silence, recognized only by those trained to see them. And that understanding, she realized, was more valuable than any public acknowledgement could ever be. Sitting quietly in her living room, she reflected on the balance she had learned to maintain throughout her life. The ordinary world visible to everyone, and the extraordinary life she carried quietly within. She understood that both were essential. Ordinary life provided grounding, perspective, and connection to humanity, while the extraordinary experiences shaped her identity, discipline, and mastery. Together, they created a life of depth, resilience, and quiet excellence. As night fell, she looked once more at the sky through her window. The stars were beginning to appear, faint and distant yet unmistakably present. She thought about the jets above, the pilots who had acknowledged her presence, and the invisible thread of respect that connected them. It was a reminder that life's most meaningful recognition was often subtle, disciplined, and deeply understood by those who shared experience and mastery. She allowed herself a moment of quiet pride, a private acknowledgement of a life well lived, a tribute received in the only way that mattered. The extraordinary and ordinary coexisted seamlessly in her world, each reinforcing the other, each providing balance, meaning, and purpose. The plane ride, the silent acknowledgement, and the ordinary life surrounding her all became part of a continuum that defined her existence. In that moment, she understood fully what it meant to live quietly extraordinary. Recognition did not need an audience, accomplishments did not need spectacle, and life's most profound moments often occurred in silence, visible only to those trained to see. She carried that truth with her as she prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring ordinary moments, challenges, and experiences, yet she would move through them with the same calm presence, quiet mastery, and deep understanding that had guided her throughout her life.